Laughter broke out from the corner of the waiting room. A young officer glanced at the man holding a baby in his arms and shook his head. "Come on. A homeless guy can't take care of anybody's kid." All the other eyes turned toward him. A few people waiting for paperwork leaned closer, whispering, pointing. His torn jacket, matted hair, shoes worn thin and soaked through. The picture of someone who didn't belong in a place like this. The man lowered his face, clutching the baby tighter in the thin blanket. The child's faint breath warmed his neck. He held on like the whole world was about to snatch her away. At his feet, a skinny dog whined softly, eyes locked on the office door ahead. No one in that room knew where this story had really begun. No one knew what he had already walked through before stepping into this police station. One thing was obvious. In that cold, fluorescent room, he was being judged, dismissed, and written off with just one label: homeless. And yet none of them realized. This man, the one they mocked, had just saved the daughter of one of the most powerful men in the city. Just 24 hours earlier, the city was still asleep under a gray dawn sky. Ethan shuffled along the back alley of a bakery in downtown Denver, his old backpack slung over one shoulder, his dog Ranger trotting faithfully by his side. The air bit at his skin, sharp with the kind of cold that made bones ache. He was used to it. Hunger and weather had been his companions for years. Ranger's ears suddenly perked. The mutt stopped, nose twitching, and gave a low growl toward a pile of cardboard boxes near a dumpster. Ethan followed his gaze. Something under a tarp shifted, just barely. His heart picked up. He pulled the tarp back with stiff fingers. Underneath was a wicker basket lined with soft cloth, cream-colored and far too fine to be left in an alley. Inside lay a newborn, bundled tight, tiny fists curled like seashells. A note rested against the baby's cheek, the ink smudged by fog. "Forgive me. Keep her safe. Someone will come." For a long moment, Ethan just stared. He expected a frantic mother to come running, but no one appeared. Ranger whined and pressed closer, as if urging him on. Ethan placed a trembling hand over the baby's chest and felt the heartbeat, fast, determined, alive. "I hear you, little one," he whispered. He had nothing. No money, no home, not even enough food for himself most days. But he knew one thing. He couldn't walk away. He lifted the basket into his arms, cradling it close, and with Ranger at his side, stepped back into the quiet streets of Denver. That single choice, made in the cold silence of an alley, was about to change everything. Ethan sat on a bench by the Platte River, the basket balanced on his lap. Ranger curled at his feet like a watchful sentry. The city was waking up. Cars honking, joggers passing, coffee cups steaming in hurried hands. A few people slowed when they noticed him. One woman frowned and hurried away. A man shook his head, muttering under his breath. Ethan ignored them. He took off his scarf and wrapped it gently around the baby's tiny body. The child stirred, gave a small sigh, then settled again. For the first time in months, Ethan felt something inside him shift. He wasn't just another forgotten man on a cold bench. He was responsible for life. But reality hit quick. The coins in his pocket clinked, $1.57. Not enough for much. Maybe milk. Maybe nothing at all. His stomach twisted with the familiar ache of hunger. But he pushed it aside. He walked into a corner grocery, head low, basket hidden under his coat. The clerk looked straight through him, the way people always did. Ethan gathered a bottle of milk, the smallest pack of diapers, and a used baby bottle from a discount shelf. His hands shook as he laid the coins on the counter. It wasn't enough. He added the last nickel from Ranger's dog food jar. The clerk sighed, but took it. Outside, Ethan asked the coffee stand across the street for a cup of hot water. The barista, busy with a line of customers, handed it over without question. Ethan warmed the milk in the cup, tested it against his wrist, and offered it to the baby. She latched on instantly, drinking greedily. Relief spread through him, sweeter than anything he'd tasted in years. That night, beneath the mural of blue herons under the 15th Street Bridge, Ethan spread out his coat. He set the basket between himself and Ranger so their body heat could form a fragile shelter. Rain tapped the concrete above them. Ethan stayed awake most of the night, listening to the baby breathe, whispering old stories about trains he once helped build, as if words could keep her safe. For once, he didn't feel invisible. He felt chosen, and it terrified him. By morning, exhaustion pulled at his bones, but the baby's soft sighs kept him moving. Ethan tried the local shelter first thing, hoping for warmth and food. A volunteer with kind but firm eyes shook her head the moment she saw the basket. "I'm sorry. No infants allowed. Liability rules." Ethan nodded, thanked her anyway, and walked out before shame could sink its claws in too deep. Ranger stayed close, tail tucked, as if he understood. In the park, an old veteran named Carl sat wrapped in a patched army jacket. He squinted at Ethan, then at the baby. "That yours?" he rasped. Ethan hesitated, then told part of the truth. "Found her. Couldn't leave her." Carl studied him a long moment, then pulled a blanket from his pack. "For the kid," he muttered, pressing 3 crumpled bills into Ethan's palm. "Buy fruit. Babies need something sweet." Ethan's throat tightened. He wanted to argue, but the man's stare dared him not to. So he nodded, grateful. He bought bananas, mashing bits with the back of a spoon, feeding the baby slowly. Each bite felt like a small miracle he had somehow engineered from nothing. Later that afternoon, as he passed a pawn shop window with an old television on display, a news alert cut through the static. A missing child report. The photo was unmistakable. The same swirl of hair, the same tiny mouth now sleeping in his basket. Sophia Hart. The caption below read, "Daughter of industrialist Daniel Hart. Authorities request any information." Ethan froze, his reflection staring back at him, overlaid with the little girl's face. His chest tightened. She wasn't just a baby left in an alley. She was the child of a man whose name owned half the city. Fear gnawed at him. Would they take her away and forget he existed? He slipped a hand into his pocket, touching the damp note he had found. "Keep her safe. Someone will come." He had promised, and promises mattered, even for a man the world had thrown away. As dusk settled over Denver, Ethan squared his shoulders. Ranger stood at his side, ears sharp, tail stiff. Together, they turned toward the police precinct, basket clutched tight. It was time to face whatever waited. Rain slicked the sidewalks as Ethan pushed forward, the wicker basket shielded beneath Carl's donated blanket. Ranger trotted close, every step alert, as if he sensed how much was at stake. The police precinct glowed ahead, a box of yellow light in the fog. Ethan's pulse hammered. He hadn't set foot inside a place like this in years, not since his life had unraveled. The thought of uniformed men judging him made his stomach knot. But he kept walking. Inside, the desk sergeant barely looked up at first. When his eyes landed on the ragged man dripping on the tile, he frowned. "Sir, can I help you?" Ethan swallowed hard. His voice cracked. I think I found somebody important." That was how the questions began. They led him to a small room, offered him coffee, asked him to sit. A nurse appeared, her hands gentle as she checked the baby over, while Ranger refused to leave her side. The infant yawned, milk-drunk and warm, as if unaware of the storm swirling around her. Within an hour, men in suits arrived. Their faces were pale from sleepless nights, their words clipped but urgent. One held a photo identical to the child in Ethan's arms. Another gripped his shoulder in gratitude he seemed too tired to voice. Ethan laid the damp note on the table, along with the crumpled receipt for milk and diapers, as if they were proof of love. Finally, the room hushed. The door opened, and in walked Daniel Hart. He didn't look like the polished billionaire from the newspapers. His tie hung loose, his eyes raw, his whole body sagging with days of fear. He went first to the baby, pressing a shaking hand to her tiny fingers. His shoulders collapsed with relief. Then slowly, he turned to Ethan. Ethan rose without meaning to, unsure what to do with his hands. "You found my daughter," Hart said, voice breaking. Ethan shook his head. "Sir, she found me." For the first time that night, a few officers smiled. Hart knelt to scratch Ranger's ears, whispering, "Thank you both." In that small room, drenched in rain and fluorescent light, the world had just shifted. Ethan wasn't invisible anymore. They moved Ethan into a quieter office, one with soft chairs that didn't wobble and a lamp that cast warm light instead of the harsh buzz of fluorescence. Sandwiches appeared, a pot of coffee, even a biscuit for Ranger. Ethan blinked at it all, overwhelmed. He hadn't been served like this in years. Daniel Hart sat across from him, no longer the titan of steel and glass skyscrapers, but a father clinging to humility. "Tell me everything," he said, his voice steady, but his hands trembling. So Ethan told him about the alley behind the bakery, the tarp, the wicker basket, about warming milk with borrowed hot water, about whispering old stories under a bridge while rain came down. He even showed the tiny diapers he had bought with shaking hands, the last coins of his pocket. Hart listened without interruption, his eyes fixed, as though one wrong blink might make it all vanish again. When Ethan finished, silence filled the room. Then Hart spoke. "There will be questions in the headlines, but you won't face them alone." Ethan's chest tightened. Alone was all he had ever known. Minutes later, the storm outside the precinct was no longer just weather. It was microphones flashing like lightning, cameras glaring like searchlights. Reporters shouted over each other. "Is it true the rescuer is homeless? Did he try to keep the child? What happens now?" Ethan's face burned. The words stuck in his throat. Before he could answer, Hart stepped forward, baby in his arms, voice carrying over the crowd. "It's true," he said. "And today, this man is also a hero." The noise shifted, hunger turning to respect. Ethan blinked, dizzy, as Ranger wagged his tail like applause. For once, Ethan didn't shrink back from the lights. He lifted his head. He stood tall. That night, for the first time in years, he didn't walk back to the bridge. He followed the Hart family sedan instead, toward a future he hadn't dared imagine. For 2 nights, Ethan and Ranger stayed in a guest room at the Hart townhouse. The walls were painted a calming cream, the bed wide and clean, the silence gentle instead of threatening. Ethan barely slept. He kept checking the crib where Sophia now lay, though she was guarded by nurses and warmed by a proper heater. Habit had trained him to wake at every sigh, to count every breath in the dark. Ranger, though, adapted instantly. He curled on a thick rug like it had been waiting for him his whole life. Staff tiptoed around, bringing food that came on plates instead of in wrappers. They even left clothes for Ethan, new jeans and a warm flannel shirt. He felt awkward wearing them, like he had borrowed someone else's weather. On the 3rd morning, Daniel Hart invited him into a study lined with cedar shelves and heavy books. The air smelled of ink and old wood. Hart wasn't a businessman then. He was simply a father still recovering from almost losing everything. "Our security failed," Hart admitted, his voice low. "We'll fix that. But more importantly, we need to repair what fear has done to you." Ethan frowned, confused. "Sir, I don't..." Hart leaned forward. "You kept my child alive. Money can't measure that. But it can open doors. Tell me what door you need." Ethan's eyes wandered to the window where Ranger slept in a patch of sunlight. His throat closed. "A place that's ours," he whispered. "A place we never have to leave." Hart didn't hesitate. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a lease, already signed, for a small apartment above a hardware store 2 neighborhoods away. Paid for a year. Keys clipped to the top. "No strings," Hart said softly. "Only thanks." Ethan stared at the keys, at the proof of dignity in his hand. He had expected cash, maybe a quick goodbye. Instead, he had been offered something rarer: permanence. Ranger barked once, sharp and delighted, as if he understood. For the first time in decades, Ethan laughed. A real, unguarded laugh. The apartment sat above a corner hardware store, its bricks weathered but sturdy, the front window spilling golden light across the sidewalk. When Ethan and Ranger first stepped inside, the air smelled faintly of fresh paint and sawdust. Sunlight poured through a small kitchen window, warming the floor. There was a bedroom with a door that closed, a closet just big enough for Ranger's blanket, and a table where the empty wicker basket now rested. A symbol of the night that had changed everything. Ethan stood in the middle of the room, keys clutched in his palm. He hadn't owned anything in years, not even a lock. Now the door behind him shut with a click that sounded like freedom. Daniel Hart checked the windows, the locks, making sure it was all secure. Then he said, "If you're willing, I can arrange work downstairs. The owner's a friend. He could use someone who knows his way around tools." Ethan blinked. "I used to work construction. I can learn again." So the weeks began to turn like steady pages. Ethan learned how to stock shelves, track invoices, hand out advice on drills and screws. Ranger became the store's unofficial mascot, greeting customers with a wagging tail, napping near the entrance as though it had always been his post. Sometimes Hart stopped by with baby Sophia. She would reach for Ethan's beard and laugh, tugging at him like he belonged. And slowly, Ethan started to believe it. Reporters tried to return, hungry for more headlines. But the story began to fade as louder news took over. Ethan was glad. He didn't want fame. He wanted peace. He kept the original note. "Forgive me. Keep her safe. Someone will come," framed above the table. It reminded him of how fragile life was, but also how grace could arrive in the unlikeliest alley. One quiet Sunday, Hart's wife, Elena, invited Ethan and Ranger back to the townhouse. In the nursery, sunlight danced across the rug. She placed Sophia in Ethan's arms and whispered, "You're family now, whether you like it or not." The word struck him harder than any storm. Family. Once that had meant arguments and slammed doors. Now it meant chairs pulled close at dinner and a bowl on the floor for Ranger. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something he'd thought was lost forever. Home. Months passed, and Ethan settled into a rhythm he'd never dreamed possible. He opened the hardware store each morning, sweeping the sidewalk while Ranger wagged a lazy tail at his side. Customers began to greet him by name, asking for his advice on everything from screws to paint thinner. To them, he wasn't that homeless guy they'd seen on the news. He was the man who showed up, steady and kind. In the evenings, he often visited the Hart family. Sophia squealed every time she saw him, crawling straight into his arms. She tugged at his beard and tried to share her toys with Ranger, who accepted them solemnly before flopping on the rug. Elena would smile, sometimes with tears in her eyes. "You gave her a second chance," she told Ethan once. He shook his head softly. "She gave me one too." It wasn't just words. He could feel it. How the little girl's laughter stitched together something torn inside him. When the holidays arrived, Elena insisted Ethan join them at the long dining table. Nervous, he sat between strangers in crisp suits and dresses, afraid he might spill his drink. But as laughter and warmth filled the room, he realized he belonged. Sophia, now toddling, tried to feed scraps to Ranger under the table. Ethan raised his glass of cider, whispering a quiet thanks. Not for riches, but for the basket, the blanket, the second chance. News of his story spread again when Elena introduced him at a charity gala. "This man reminded us that heroes don't always wear suits," she said. "Sometimes they wear rags and carry loyalty in the form of a dog." Applause thundered. Ethan blushed, wishing he could disappear, but his words carried steady over the microphone. "I didn't save her for recognition," he said. "I did it because kindness is the only thing we truly own. Without it, we're nothing." The hall fell silent, then erupted. Ranger barked, tail thumping like a drumbeat. For once, Ethan didn't flinch at the spotlight. He stood tall, shoulders straight, and let himself be seen. That night, as he walked home beneath Denver's winter stars, he understood. This wasn't charity. This was dignity restored. Ethan never forgot where he had come from. On cold nights, instead of hiding in the comfort of his new apartment, he sometimes walked back beneath the bridge where he and Ranger once slept. But now, he carried bags of food instead of empty pockets. Children at the shelters would run to Ranger, who sat patiently while small hands tugged at his ears. Ethan would sit with the parents, telling his story quietly, never boastful. "Tomorrow can change everything," he'd say. "Don't give up." People listened, not because he sounded like a preacher, but because he sounded like one of them. He was one of them. Proof that compassion could rewrite destiny. Still, there were nights he woke suddenly, breath tight, expecting concrete under his back and hunger in his stomach. Ranger would nudge his hand with a wet nose, grounding him in the here and now. Slowly, Ethan learned to accept warmth without fear, to let hot water soothe his bones, to trust the roof above his head. Yet the greatest comfort came from Sophia. As she grew, she would squeal whenever he visited, calling him Uncle Ethan. She spoiled Ranger with treats, begged Ethan to tell her stories, and climbed into his lap like it was the safest place in the world. Elena often sat nearby, eyes glistening. "You gave her life," she whispered once. Ethan shook his head. "She gave mine back." Years blurred forward. Sophia blossomed into a young woman known for her kindness, her laughter echoing the same light he had once fought to protect in the cold. At a garden party, she threw her arms around him, introducing him proudly to friends. "This is the man who saved me, my uncle." Guests whispered, recognizing him from long-faded headlines. Elena touched his arm, her voice soft but firm. "You're part of this family, always." And beneath strings of glowing lights, Ethan realized something. Belonging wasn't about blood or wealth or the address on a deed. It was about the people who opened their doors when the world had shut them all. He looked down at Ranger, older now, muzzle silvered, eyes still bright, and whispered, "We made it, buddy." Ranger wagged his tail, as though to say, "Yes, finally." Time moved on, as it always does. Ethan's beard grew whiter, his steps slower. but his spirit stayed strong. Ranger, too, aged beside him, his once black muzzle now frosted gray, though his tail still thumped with mischief when Sophia visited. Sophia had become a young woman with a heart shaped by the man who once found her in an alley. She often told people, "My life was saved not by guards or fortune, but by a man the world forgot, and his dog." Every time Ethan heard her say it, pride and humility tangled inside him. He hadn't just saved her life, she had saved his too. One quiet evening, she sat with him in the Hart family's garden. Lanterns glowed in the trees, and the scent of roses drifted on the breeze. She asked softly, "Uncle Ethan, what kept you going back then, when you had nothing?" Ethan stroked Ranger's thinning fur, gazing at the stars. "Hope," he said. "And this dog, sometimes hope looks like a friend on four legs. Sometimes it sounds like a baby's cry in the night. You hold on, because maybe tomorrow will give you something worth living for." She leaned against him, whispering, "You're my hero." Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. Heroes are just ordinary people who decide not to walk away. Those words stayed with her and with many others. His story began to be retold in classrooms, in sermons, in podcasts. Teachers called it proof of resilience. Families shared it as a reminder that kindness changes everything. But Ethan never chased recognition. For him, victory wasn't fame. It was walking home at night with Ranger beside him, knowing there was food in the cupboard, knowing he could lock the door and rest without fear. "A roof, a friend, and love," he once told a reporter who caught him outside the hardware store. "That's all anyone really needs." The world nodded. His simple truth carried more weight than speeches from politicians. And as years turned into decades, Ethan finally found what he had been denied for so long: peace. Toward the end of his life, Ethan often sat by the window of his modest apartment, Ranger curled faithfully at his feet. The city outside still roared with sirens and traffic. But inside, the air was soft, steady, safe. Above his small kitchen table hung the framed note he had once pulled from that basket in the alley. "Forgive me. Keep her safe. Someone will come." He no longer saw it as a wound, but as proof of mercy. How even broken beginnings could lead to beautiful endings. Visitors sometimes asked about it. Ethan would smile and say, "That's the reminder that the world doesn't forget everyone. Sometimes it sends help." One summer evening, the Hart family hosted a gathering in their garden. Lights twinkled across the trees, music drifted gently, and laughter filled the air. Sophia, no longer the fragile baby, but a strong young woman running charities in Ethan's name, hurried into his arms. "Uncle Ethan," she said, hugging him tightly. Her voice broke a little. "You gave me a life." Ethan shook his head, his voice a whisper. "We gave each other one." Daniel and Elena stood nearby, their eyes warm with gratitude that had never dimmed. To them, Ethan wasn't a guest. He was family, woven into their story as much as their own blood. Later that night, as the stars spread over Denver, Ethan leaned back in his chair, Ranger breathing slowly beside him. Sophia's laughter echoing across the lawn. Gratitude washed over him like the softest tide. He had walked a long, painful road, from forgotten to unforgettable, from invisible to embraced. And when Ethan finally closed his eyes one peaceful evening, Ranger nestled close, as if to guard him on that last journey. The Hart family mourned deeply, but they also celebrated his legacy. His story became more than a headline. It became a parable whispered on cold nights, a lesson told to children. A man once chose kindness when the world ignored him, and it changed everything. And so Ethan was remembered, Not as a homeless man, not as a burden, but as the man who gave love when it mattered most.